Previously in Vera's missionary work. Victims First Northumbria isn't the only charity she's a trustee of. She's also a trustee of a charity called Respect. Respect does actually deal, or claim to deal, with the male victims of domestic abuse. But that's a sideline. Mainly it deals with the perpetrators of domestic abuse and trying to train them in ways of dealing with being abusers. Although Vera is a trustee of Respect, she's not the coordinator. The coordinator is somebody called Todd. Todd has such tweets as challenging men's violence and abuse, entitlement and privilege on IWD 2016. Just another day at the office. Challenging men's violence and abuse, entitlement and privilege. This is somebody you'd want to go to if you were actually a victim of domestic abuse. Basically, as a sideline, they have male victims of domestic abuse, but on the whole, their charity is about training perpetrators to not be perpetrators anymore by giving them techniques such as timeout. I've got an article on timeout I want to read to you. I think, from what I can gather, is they'll try their darndest to convince you that you're the perpetrator. If you went to them and said, oh, I'm a victim of domestic abuse, if you're male, I think they'll try and convince you you're the perpetrator. And then they'll use that as a sort of foot in the door to start teaching about privilege and how you're over entitled, try and train you into being docile. I don't think they're actually going to help anyone. Even people that actually are genuine perpetrators, I don't think they'll get under the underlying causes for why you are, because I think that they will assume that the reason that somebody is a perpetrator is because they have too much power. Well, I suppose I should live on promises, so here is that promised article on Time Out and some of the concerns I have about the charity called Respect. I'm afraid this is a bit long, but I promise it's tangent free. I don't go off any rambling tangents, I promise. It's all meaty stuff. Just stick with it. Make a cup of tea. Time Out, a strategy for reducing men's violence against women in relationships. Wistow, Kelly and Westmoreland. This article critically explores accounts of how men attending domestic violence perpetrator programs DVPP use the Time Out strategy. Findings are drawn from 71 semi-structured interviews with 44 men attending DVPPs and 27 female partners or ex-partners of men in DVPPs. We describe three ways in which the technique is used. First, as intended to interrupt potential physical violence. Second, through the effective adoption of the Time Out rules by victim survivors. And finally, misappropriation by some men to continue and extend their controlling behaviours. Policy and practice lessons are drawn from the findings through connecting broader and deeper measurements of what success means when working with domestic violence perpetrators to the ways in which the Time Out technique was used. Introduction. Despite the proliferation of domestic violence perpetrator programs, DVPPs across the world in criminal justice and non-criminal justice settings, hardly any research has examined how men use the strategies and techniques taught within the programs or how these are experienced by their partners or ex-partners. Research has instead tended to focus on whether they as a body of interventions work or not. This neglects the more nuanced question of program content and implementation. In this article, we critically examine one frequently used technique promoted in many programs, that of encouraging men to take time out. We test the application and use of time out from a sample of victim survivors and perpetrators of domestic violence, defined here as physical, sexual, and non-physical forms of intimate partner and ex-partner violence and abuse, including coercion and control. Okay, this is worth bearing in mind because it means that when we actually come to talking about what gets said, we don't know that the people being talked about actually use violence, physical violence. They may be using non-physical violence, which could involve just shouting at each other or some form of controlling behaviour, including withdrawal, which is interesting. But we'll come to that much later. Right, let me skip most of the introduction and sort of cap what it is and why we're talking about it as well, because of course some of these DVPPs are run by Respect, which is a charity that Vera Baird is one of the trustees of. It's one of my friends of Vera Baird. Yeah, and the thing about Respect is it's also connected to the men's advice line. The men's advice line is supposed to be Respect's main job is training abusive people to not be abusive. It's also got this men's advice line attached, which is for male victims of domestic violence. Basically, if you're a male victim of domestic violence, the line you're put through to isn't the line for people that are victims of domestic violence. It's the line for people that are perpetrators. Perpetrators of both genders. Okay. You can have lesbian perpetrators. We'll train them as well. Yeah, if you're, it's the line for perpetrators, right? It's the same. It's the charity that deals with training perpetrators. That's the one you put through to, not the one that specialises in dealing with victims, but the one that specialises in dealing with perpetrators. And then, of course, they're going to put you through a little assessment to work out whether you are a victim or a perpetrator. Do you trust them? Do you trust them to do that without bias? They're feminists. If you tell them that 1 in 3 victims of domestic violence are men, they'll claim that's an exaggeration and that predominantly violence is male violence. And they've decided that the branch of their charity that is going to deal with male victims is the branch that specialises in dealing with perpetrators. So anyway, and they're put on these programs by Respect, amongst other things in these DVPPs. So teach you techniques. Now, one of these techniques that they're teaching is the timeout technique, which I'm about to talk about in a moment. I actually don't think the timeout technique is a bad idea. In fact, when I've been in situations myself, I didn't need any training. That was always the thing when there was a sort of like it. If I was in a situation where it looked like things were going to get heated, I got myself out of there. I don't think it matters whether you're the perpetrator or the victim, or whether the relationship is one of reciprocal aggression. I think it's 4 years ago I need to get out of there, rather than let things lead to violence, isn't it? Seems sensible to me, doesn't it? We need training to do that. That would be the first thing I think of is I've got to get out of this situation. So I'm not against timeout. I'm just finding that some of the stories we're going to hear when we get to the findings in this study lead me to suspect that the people that they put on these perpetrator training courses are either not necessarily the perpetrator, or they are in some way or other a victim as well, which means either it's reciprocal, I think it's probably reciprocally abusive relationship. So either they're not the abuser or they are a reciprocal abuser. But what I'm saying is that the responsibility is not on one set of shoulders or the other. What is the timeout technique? Well, the timeout technique, as the name suggests, involves removing oneself for a period of time from the situation. It is viewed in DVPPs as a temporary interruption technique with rules for the perpetrator on what to do and what not to do. It is variously described by DVPPs as an emergency safety precaution, a way of handcuffing yourself before it is too late, the most basic alternative to being violent, and giving space for things to calm down, or taking a breather, a tool to help you avoid being violent. It is recommended as a tool to enable men to manage their own behaviour on occasions where they would otherwise use physical violence. As one program put it, you cannot hit her if you're not in her presence. It is a short-term behavioural strategy which aims to provide space to reflect and avoid violence. The description by Ahimsa Also makes it clear it's intended as a transitional tool. Timeout can help you avoid situations in which you have previously acted violently until you learn how to handle them peacefully on a regular basis. Program materials are fairly prescriptive as to what a timeout should and should not entail. Most suggest a length of an hour, although some are more flexible. However long it is for all specify that understanding use technique must be agreed on with the partner. Program facilitators are requested to go through this in detail with the men. For example, discuss with the man the different stages of his individual taking a breather plan. Ensure that he understands each of the steps of the process and there's concrete examples of things he could do and places he could go during this period. Concentrate on your breathing. Practice self-calming. Relax, let go, think straight. Stop your angry thoughts with more realistic self-talk. Remember, your partner is not the enemy. Your partner is not the enemy. That's very interesting, isn't it? Now, I would kind of endorse that. It's a very good idea not to see your partner as the enemy. Except, you can't say it to one party and not say it to the other. So if you're saying to the perpetrator, your partner's not the enemy, you're also saying that to the victim, aren't you? Your partner's not the enemy. Which is fair enough. Okay, yeah, so your partner's not the enemy, really. The violence is the problem. Okay, that's what you're sorting out. The violence. That's the enemy of your relationship. The enemy of your relationship is this sort of nastiness that started to develop in you. But it's very interesting. You wouldn't say that. I think of the sort of way violence is depicted, abuses are depicted. Film, TV, the Jets, any sort of jet dramas where your wife murders her abusive husband and she's, heroic for that. It's got to be reciprocal, isn't it? You can't say, you can't have two people and one of them is the enemy of the other, but the other one's not the enemy. Being an enemy cannot be a non-reciprocal relationship. Exploring and agreeing how timeouts will be used with partners is an integral rather than an optional component. It's very important to talk about timeouts to your partner well ahead of when you will need to use one. Do this at a time when you're calm and she has agreed to discuss it with you. Show this information and give her the time to read it. She may not want to talk with you about it. If this is the case, leave this information with her. When she can read it another time, if she chooses to, a timeout is a tool for you, not for your partner. You don't need her support to use it. You don't need her support to use it. Okay. I want you to remember that, because that might come up later. You don't need her support to use it. That's what it's said in the course. However, it's essential that you let her read this information if she so chooses. Just that there are rules and guidelines about what to do, therefore what not to do is also emphasized. Men are advised not to drive, drink alcohol, or take drugs, alongside injunctions to never use a timeout against her in an abusive or controlling manner. Respect adds more descriptive content to inappropriate applications of the technique. Using it against her by storming out in the middle of an argument, pretending that you were taking a time out, using as an excuse to go to the pub or to stay out late, telling her that she needs to take a time out, returning from a time out without having calmed down, still wanting to argue, or using it to control your partner in any way. What do we already know about timeout? To date, very little research that has looked at the implementation of the timeout technique. In the United States, Gondolf argued it had the potential at an early stage of involvement to teach men how to control their behavior. Interruption methods are not only simple to implement, but they also contribute to a sense of self-efficacy and accomplishment. That is, get some results fast. In the United Kingdom, Dobash, Kavanagh and Lewis identified the contribution that violence avoidance strategies made to reductions in physical violence, but found no evidence that these strategies reduced emotional or sexual abuse. In Ireland, Debbonairre and Walton interviewed 24 women whose partners were in DVPPs. If the name Debbonairre seems eerily familiar to you, yeah. T. Debbonairre, which is from the two Debbonaires there, is Thangham Debbonairre, who accused a student of making death threats because he or she told Ms. Debbonairre to get in the sea. with that story. Some of the women interviewed had found the timeout helpful when they felt their partner was likely to be abusive, and reported improvements in physical safety, particularly in the early stages of a man's involvement in the program. Yeah, I think one of the issues with being the early stages was something that comes up later is that it could feasibly be used as a way of avoiding the issues. So taking yourself from situations in which things might explode, but you can't actually do anything about the pressures that are about to explode. So I mean, it avoids the earthquake, but it doesn't change the fact there's a fault line there. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. It avoids the eruption, but doesn't prevent the fact that there's pressure. It's going to explode at some point. So that's why I think, maybe it only works temporarily, because it doesn't deal with the underlying causes. That does get raised. Some women also chose to use it themselves to get their own space, with one woman in the Debbonairre et al. Studies stating, "I've taken time out myself with one of the girls. It helped me to get some space from how he was behaving." Jennings identified systemic factors that inhibit and complicate the use of timeout, including that partners are unaware that timeout is an approved violence prevention technique. This lack of information was also highlighted as a key concern by Debbonairre et al., including that some women had been deliberately misinformed by their partner about the technique. The Debbonairre et al. Study concludes that only 6 of 24 women had accurate and complete information, and that this enabled men to misuse timeout. Moreover, Debbonairre et al. Note that even where the man is using timeout correctly, the technique can increase women's fear and anxiety. Here, taking a timeout acts as a signal that the man is considering using violence. Prolonged use of timeout indicates the potential for abuse is still there. Gondolf warns against a man viewing this newfound ability to use the interruption technique as a cure. Unfortunately, the process of change and the end of psychological abuse is far from complete. In fact, while physical abuse may lessen, the psychological abuse may actually increase as the man verbalizes his newly discovered hurts and uses this to manipulate his wife. His newly discovered hurts? Well, he has some hurts then. Confess that he has some hurts, and expressing them is manipulation. Do you know this whole thing? They go, "Oh, feminists only say that men should express their emotions more." He's just discovered some hurts, but expressing them apparently is manipulation. So actually you are against him expressing his emotions. I think one of the problems with this whole DVPP is it's not relationship counselling. It isn't to give a safe forum in which they can express to each other their feelings of unhappiness in the relationship. And in fact, it still considers him expressing his hurts as being a manipulation. You're not just in the business of preventing violence, which I'm all in favour of, because I'm very anti-violence myself. You're actually in favour of suppressing his emotions too, because his emotions could be considered to be manipulations. His hurts could actually be legitimate grievances. Consensus across the little data we have is that moving beyond interruption techniques is strongly associated with lasting and deeper change in men's understandings and behaviour. The existing knowledge base is therefore extremely thin, although what does exist seems to support the caveats that DVPPs put in place around the use of timeouts. There's a temporary strategy of which the partner needs to be fully aware. NVivo was used to search the 177 Project Mirabelle interviews with men on DVPPs and women partners and ex-partners. A text search was carried out to find where timeout and timeouts appeared in the interviews. The search was set to be inclusive and to find stemmed words which allow variations of the term to be returned. In 71 of the 177 interviews, the timeout technique was mentioned. Of these, 37 interviews took place in the beginning of the program and 34 at the end. An initial surface level analysis led to the coding of examples into useful, negative, and mixed use of the timeout technique. Further coding refined the analysis into two broad categories: successful uses that went beyond an interruption of physical violence, and unsuitable uses that cover both failure to prevent violence and uses of structured control. Subcategories were then developed within the broadest measures of success to identify several pathways for the use of timeout. Okay, so you got it. So basically what they've done is they've gone through these interviews and they've basically done sort of search for the words timeout and then look for information. What comes from the sort of interviews with the people using the DVPP and the partners and ex-partners of those using the DVPP training. And there's going to be some positive ones at the beginning. There's some positive ones at the beginning of the article. As I say, it's not a bad idea. You know, if things are getting heated and it looks like things are going to kick off, get the hell out of there until you've both had a chance to calm down, spend some time apart, and it gives you time to get your thoughts together and get things into perspective. It's not a bad idea. So obviously there are some positive things. So I'm going to skip most of that, not because it's not there. So let's not misrepresent it. There is some positive responses to the timeout, and it's not the timeout itself I'm criticizing. It's actually the DVPP. I'm going to skip that, apart from I'm not going to skip a certain character because he turns up later. It's a character called Peter. So I'm going to leave him in because I want to introduce you to him. Several men welcomed being told about timeout. I gave them a tool that enabled a belief that they could stop using violence. I didn't know what to do at the time, and I'd sit there fuming and sort of running in my head how just everything was and how poorly I've been treated, and usually getting more cross. The timeout was exactly the tool I was ready for and had been searching for. I couldn't figure all this out by myself, unfortunately. I couldn't piece it all together in my own head. I need to be sat down and told what to do. When I was told what to do, it's great. Peter, near the start of the program. Assume that's supposed to be unjust, everything was, rather than just everything was. That doesn't make much sense that just everything was. I think what Peter just said was, I didn't know what to do at the time, and I would sit there fuming and sort of running in my head how unjust everything was and how poorly I'd been treated, and usually get more cross. We're going to meet Peter again later. I get a bit concerned about Peter. Yeah, but in some way Peter does feel that he's been unjustly treated in some way. We never really find out how. But notice also he says, I need to be told what to do. I need to be told what to do. This is one of the earliest indications that he's not a terribly assertive person. So not only does he feel he's been unfairly treated, but also doesn't know what to do about it. He wants somebody to tell him what to do. So I'm going to skip forward a bit again to the next point at which I find something of interest. Otherwise we're listening to a lot of boring text, aren't we? The importance of transitioning into relational techniques was illustrated by one man who acknowledged that timeout was not preventing his children from becoming anxious during and after he took one. He saw his children's continued anxiety as a product of experiences of witnessing past incidents of violence and abuse. Such anxiety may also be linked to the timeout on its own, not changing a man's abusive attitudes and behaviours, merely acting as a tool to interrupt those behaviours. See, that was a strange conclusion to jump to, wasn't it? I mean, what he said there seemed quite reasonable. He said, well, I've noticed my kids get anxious because they associate that timeout. They know I'm angry. And even though I have this timeout so I can make sure I'm not violent, they still sense that tension. They still feel anxious. And I think they base that on previous experiences of me exploding and being violent. However, the assumption of the researchers here is odd, but it kind of shows their psychology. It's interesting, isn't it? It shows their psychology. Because they're going, all their anxiety may also be linked to the timeout not changing a man's abusive attitudes and behaviours. See, if somebody is anxious, it must be because somebody else has been abusive. And it's the same thing they had about being scared. You know, oh, I scared her, and therefore that's me. It's like the emotional response of one person is the responsibility of another person. Yeah, they're anxious because they've had previous bad experiences when he's been angry or he's been upset. And because they've had previous bad experiences, they associate him being upset with him being in some way abusive or violent or explosive or whatever. But that doesn't mean the anxiety they're having now means that he's still being abusive, right? In the same way as, you know, if you're scared of a spider, doesn't mean the spider is trying to scare you, right? So just because you have an emotional reaction doesn't mean that emotional reaction is something that is being inflicted upon you. And yet, I think what he's saying there is quite rational. He's saying, I think this is because they put this past instance. Well, I think it probably is. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But the researchers are assuming, I think it's also linked to the fact you're still abusive. I feel this is one of the things I feel is beyond unreasonable expectations upon men, is the emotional reactions of people to them is still their responsibility, even if the responses are irrational. It's like that whole thing. You triggered me online. People going, oh, you triggered me. Well, that means that the emotion you're having is irrational. His assumption that the children's anxiety is a product of their past experiences of witnessing him be violent is very probably true. He probably carries that forward, and he wish he could undo it. He wish he could have make it unhappen. Wish he could unhappen it, and he can't. That must be a great weight upon him, and I feel that burden. I understand that burden, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's continuing to be abusive. Relational timeouts. Timeouts were not always applied exactly as they're being taught, and narrow measurements of the program impact may have designated these as failures of implementation. Variations here including applying timeouts for a shorter time than instructed duration, driving during the timeout, and staying within the property. Everyday circumstances could prove challenging in terms of the rules, for example, driving in the car together or not able to leave the house quickly due to being unable to find keys, phones, and shoes. That's happened to me. To escape a hostile situation, I had to cross town without any shoes, which was later used against me as evidence that I was mad. Yeah, well, I was trying to avoid a situation very responsibly, and having shoes became a low priority because I knew if I took the time to take shoes, then I wouldn't be able to avert that situation. Closer analysis revealed communication, negotiation, and agreement on how to proceed in some cases. In fact, the very process of doing this changed the interaction between some women and men. Engagements in which women had both voice and agency. For example, a temporary timeout was agreed between a woman and a man driving together. They sat next to each other until they reached a destination, at which point the man initiated the full timeout away from his partner. It is these lived experience complications that test an instrumental technique with the timeout principles rather than the rules evident. Women also provide examples of where they determined how the timeout was to happen. I had a timeout the other day. We weren't even arguing. It was about something going to shop or something, and we were walking because you come out the back of here and right down the back of my garden through there. That's Morrison's, and we use it as a cut through. And he was like right outside Morrison's. I'm like, time out, thingy. Don't you fucking dare shout at me in front of people, because to me, it's normally you don't really do arguing in front of other people. It's a bit embarrassing, you know. That's Ivy, a partner in the start of the program. So I'm in this time out thing. That program one is fantastic. I just say to him now, time out, and he'll go out for a walk. Simone, partner in this type of program. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're always sort of like led to believe that these abusers are Machiavellianly clever and trying to control their partners. And yet, if they go, I think you need to have a time out, don't you? They go, all right, I'll do it. They can turn around and take control, and their husbands are quite prepared to do that. It suggests to me that actually the relationships in which those take place are not relationships in which there is a big bad man who is controlling a weak, helpless woman. In fact, there's a couple that have relationship issues that lead to violence. Because clearly she has enough control that when she says, I think you need to go for a timeout, don't you? Oh, don't you fucking dare talk to me like that. Outside Morrison's. Where timeouts were preventing and reducing violent and abusive incidents, they were, in some instances, following the greater space for action and more respectful communication that programs were aiming to embed. For example, David recounts how his daughter went to her mum for chocolate after he had said no and was given some. He then reflects on the process and what happened in his return. I saw her with it and I just lost it. I started shouting. I flipped and kicked off like I always used to. Then I walked out and went on my timeout. When I came back, I asked her if she had heard me telling the bairn that she couldn't have it, and she said no. And so we sat and talked about it, and then we got the bairn and explained to her that if she asks her mum for something and she says no, it's not to ask me or vice versa. When I was having my timeout, when I was thinking, I knew straight away that it was my fault again because I didn't ask my partner if she had heard me. I should have asked her instead of kicking off. And that was Will near the end of the program. Here Will acknowledged that he had more work to do, and the timeout was one way in which to create the reflective space to do this. It had become a relational technique, increasing his understanding, taking responsibility, and respectfully communicating with his partner and child, and beginning to explore his own sense of entitlement. So he clearly has a problem. He jumps to conclusions, and that's why he has a temper problem, because he immediately sees that he's been feels his authority has been undermined there, and ultimately thinks that his authority has been undermined deliberately rather than by mistake. Yeah, he jumps to conclusions, and they did identify the actual problem with the child. The child was playing them off against one another, and they went, "No, you can't do that. It's not fair. If you ask one of us and we say no, you can't go." So, they dealt with the issue without aggression. What's entitlement got to do with that? I don't understand where this phrase entitlement comes from at this point. Why is it suddenly saying the sense of entitlement? The sense of entitlement to do what? He let himself get angry because he didn't assess the full situation before reacting emotively, right? He wasn't stoical, in fact. He wasn't stoical. He wasn't rational. He allowed his emotional response, his knee-jerk emotional response, to be the response he acted upon. What's got to do with entitlement? I understand. Well, if that is entitlement, that's what most of us deal with all the time, is knee-jerk responses from women regarding topics we're trying to have rational conversations with, and they misinterpret them, and they go, you're a rape apologist or whatever. No, you haven't actually read what I've said, have you? Is that a sense of entitlement? It's very strange to use the word entitlement there. I think that's just that observation. Timeouts sometimes became relational when they were linked to other learnings. I could see that I needed total improving. Am I really listening to my partner? Are we on the same page? Am I being supportive enough? Just let her go if she's angry. Just let her have it out and just tell her, look, as long as it doesn't get abusive, and if it does, I'll have a timeout. Near the end of the program. This one's a strange one. Just let her go if she's angry. Just let her have it out and just tell her, look, as long as it doesn't get abusive, and if it does, I'll have a timeout. So it sounds to me like she's the one that loses her temper and gets abusive. But he's saying, if you're going to get abusive, I'm going to have a timeout. It hasn't been considered that it could be her that could be abusive there. Assume that Owen's the abuser, right? He's on the Perpetrator program. But he's saying with his timeout, if you're going to get abusive, I'm going to have a timeout. I thought the timeouts would be for the abuser. So that was one that struck me as strange. Both men and women provided examples of timeouts stopping this vicious cycle. Sebastian provided an example of using timeouts when his partner started to get scared in arguments. He identified that his partner had consistently communicated that she was getting scared in arguments, but that I just didn't hear that before. More respectful communication led to him being able to identify when to take a timeout, providing him the ability to see that his violence was his choice. There's always a choice, my choice to be like that. Understanding that, I suppose, I always knew it wasn't acceptable, but it's now a greater understanding that, that it's just totally and utterly unacceptable. This guy is speaking towards the end of the program. Bear in mind what we learned from the beginning there from the sample. Some of these men won't get to see their children unless they go through the course and pass the course. Go on the course. So they are quite highly motivated. That sentence there did sound a lot like he was trying to appease, didn't it? I mean, obviously I knew it was unacceptable, but now I know it's completely and utterly unacceptable. Just trying to say, oh, this course has been valuable to me, and then maybe it hasn't. And his partner got scared. Again, I think that's not necessarily his fault, is it? His partner gets scared. His partner might be easy to scare. Just because she gets scared, it's like me an abusive thing as well. Like, you can't be manipulative to say, oh, I'm scared. So now you got to do as I say until I'm not scared. Whether that's the case or not, whether his wife was just, pretending to be scared to manipulate him, or whether, in fact, she is easily findable, or whether he is just very scary. I do feel that he's telling them what they want to hear when he says, yeah, I mean, obviously I realise that. He's trying to say, oh, this course has been valuable. Of course it's supposed to be valuable to me. It's been valuable to me in some way. Nobody deserves that. And again, if it's just having those strategies and procedures in place in your own mind, that if you can feel it's getting to that, then you've got something to do to not get to that next stage, Sebastian near the end of the program. One woman discussed how her partner used to go off and sulk. Sulk. Something about the word sulk, isn't there? Are you going to go off and sulk now? You can go off and sulk. Are you going to go off and have an emotion? You go off and have your emotion, then emotion. Yeah, I've always felt that sulk is a word that's used to delegitimize male emotions. Hurt. You're not allowed to feel hurt. That's one of the emotions that you're not allowed to feel, hurt. If you feel hurt, I'm going to call it sulking. Funny, isn't it? Him going off and sulking is supposed to be abusive, but it's not abusive when she goes, oh, I'm getting scared. I'm getting scared now. I'm getting scared. I didn't realise she was getting scared. Now I realise it's getting scared of the other guy. But he's having an emotion there, which means he needs to go off on his own, which is what the timeout is for, right? That is what the timeout is for. But this is before he's actually arranged a timeout. This is before he's established a timeout. And he's going off and having an emotion by himself where he's safe, away from her. And she's calling it sulking. So now I feel there's a lack of respect for his emotions. They've actually called it sulking. Well, you're hurt. Are you hurt? You're going licking your wounds now, are you? How dare you feel sorry for yourself? How dare you have emotions? Your emotions are abusive to me. And pretending to be scared or performing the emotion of being scared would be a way of manipulating somebody as well. If he wants to be manipulating, controlling, you need to go, you scared me. You could justify things as well. Justify violence towards somebody by saying you scared me. Oh, he did think she scared me. It's difficult to say, isn't it? Whether an expression or an emotion is manipulative or not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. How do you just decide which expressions of emotion are manipulative or not? Which put up resentment in the relationship. Time out had created space for her and her partner to discuss why they were both upset with each other and to work out ways to deal with the situation. I can't ignore that, can I? Because that sounds quite positive, doesn't it? If you say, "Oh, he used to go off and suck. Now he has timeouts." I think the positive thing is they might have relabeled them. He's no longer sulking. He's now having a timeout. So when he comes back, he can go, "Okay, let's talk about why I'm upset." But I think that's the only difference, is because he's basically doing the same thing. He's going off and having a think, isn't he? And then she used to call it sulking. Now she calls it timeout. Everyone's happy about it. I think that's the only difference. But it seems as though it had some sort of positive effect on their relationship, that bit of training. But I think the positive thing on their relationship seems to be the reframing of what she was originally calling sulking. They're now calling it timeout, I think. Right, let's have another skip forward in the article to the next interesting bit, which is where we get talking about misappropriated timeouts, which is kind of the idea that they've been, timeout itself is in some way being abused by who they see as the perpetrator. Some of the stories get quite interesting. Misappropriation of timeout. Our data includes accounts of timeouts being misused, routes for men to avoid taking responsibility for their actions, including women having to insist he takes a timeout, or absenting themselves. In the positive examples above, we saw the modification of laws be beneficial when respectfully negotiated. In this section, we describe a totally different approach to rule modification, with adaptations always serving the interests of the perpetrator. Where women initiated timeout, this included where she felt she had no choice but to take herself out of the situation, or where she requests that the man takes the timeout, he refuses. In other cases, the man absconded, but he used timeout to hide, flee. Flee. Strange word, isn't it? He's fleeing. That's a very abusive thing to do, fleeing. The abuser's fleeing. The abuser's fleeing the abused. It's a strange one, that, isn't it? Fleeing a situation, to me, seems perfectly appropriate. Right? To me, that seems appropriate. If you're fleeing a situation, fleeing means that you see a threat somewhere, even if the threat is, I'm afraid that I will lose control. Which is, again, what time it's supposed to be, right? You fear you're going to lose control, so you get out of the situation. Fleeing seems to be an allegation being made by the partner that is accusing him of being the abuser. If he's got something to flee, that implies that either he isn't the abuser, or the abuse is some way reciprocal. Withdraw, conceal, or evade. Examples were also given of men initiating timeouts in which they required the woman to leave, thus shifting the responsibility for preventing violence onto her. One man recognized the need for long-term change inside, while admitting his inability to put the strategies he had learnt, including timeout, to practice. Change was evading him. But things like the timeout techniques, some of them are... Timeout's a good thing to have, obviously. It's not a long-term strategy. So the long-term gain is to change, like inside. I find myself in this situation. I've created this situation. I've slipped up. I've attacked my partner. Have I done everything I should have done? Have I done everything I've been told to do? Have I used everything I've been given by the course? And the answer invariably is no, I have not. It was Peter near the start of the programme. If we contrast Peter's example with that of Brendan's given earlier, in relation to addressing his feelings rather than merely initiating a timeout, both men recognised that they should change. There was some programme impact, but Brendan found his own pathway to more respectful communication with his partner, whereas Peter had not. Both suggest that the techniques taught in DVPP were appropriate and even useful, but the men had to find the desire and commitment to change within themselves. The misappropriation of timeouts to the benefit of the perpetrator was sometimes absolutely inappropriate, and in other examples was partially so. Instances were designated partially inappropriate when some immediate improvements in safety were noted, but with nevertheless no evidence of deeper change. In absolute inappropriate uses, timeout itself became a new control strategy and an extension of the man's power. Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? His power, the underlying assumption behind the Luthien model. Look at how much this has come out to Luthien. We did mention Luthien earlier on. Is that violence is associated with power? Whereas actually it's also missing the violence associated with frustration. And frustration is a lack of power, isn't it? It's feeling power powerless that makes you feel frustrated. In fact, yeah, I should think the timeout probably is empowering, because it's saying, to gain control, you could remove yourself from that situation when you feel like you're losing control. I actually think timeout is probably quite good advice. I find it very strange that they're now saying, it extends his power. Yeah, that's why it works. That's why it works, is you empowered yourself to remove yourself from the situation. I don't think it's a bad thing. It's because it gives him power that it makes him less likely to be violent. It's strange that it's making that an allegation about it. Women initiated timeouts. A small number of women reported that they took responsibility for either leaving the house or going somewhere else within the house. One stated that she knew more about what and when the timeout should be used on her partner. Another woman decided their partner's reluctance meant that she adopted the technique for herself. And, if we'd had an argument, I'd try and get out of the house because it's really hard to get him to leave. Even on his timeouts, doesn't do them properly. He kind of forces me to leave because I want to get away from him. That's Jessica, partner, near start program. A small number of men also admitted to refusing to take a timeout when their partner had asked them to, with some recognising the consequence of this. I shoved her out the door. I tore the phone out of the socket and pushed her towards the park. So, I don't know why she doesn't remember it. She was holding the baby, and I had my son there as well, who was imploring me to calm down and behave and everything. So it was terrible. She did run away. She said, "You can't do a timeout," and we'd been drinking, so timeout's difficult then. I went to the pub and then for 3 pints. It was terrible. Peter near the start of the program. Timeouts were themselves sources of arguments, and when this was the case, the woman would often choose to leave, which, as I say, could be empowering for her. I think the reason timeout works, maybe because it does give you power, gives you power to remove yourself from the situation. So I think her removing herself from the situation, she might also find empowering. Peter's a strange one, though, isn't he? He's pushing her out. Go away, because I know I'm going to be violent soon. Peter's a strange one. I think he's a bit the case. I don't think it's a problem with women absconding themselves. In terms of relativity, time out, same distance, isn't it, between them? He's as far from her as she is from him. Not only has he removed himself from her presence, but at the same time he is removing her from his presence. The distance between them is the same. It's relative. So actually, whoever actually decides to take the time out is the one who is taking the power into their own hands. So whoever does the time out actually is taking the power. They're really worried about people having power. Yeah, the power is in the hands of whoever time outs, really. And it doesn't really matter who does it because the distance between them is the same. Why does it matter? It's because they think that time out is taking responsibility. Well, taking responsibility is taking power. Power and responsibility go hand in hand, don't they? Absconding. Even where men left the situation, this was not always used for reflection. Rather, some men fled the situation and the responsibility to themselves and the program, adding to the tensions. Revealing illustrations of this behaviour were in calling time out control arguments. When time out was used in this context, it was a deliberate withdrawal, a point where men were claiming they had won the argument, or to ensure they had the last word. Similarly, this technique was used as a refusal to communicate, thus refusing women a voice and role in resolving a dispute. Alright, I haven't helped the situation because every time there's an argument I go time out and I'll disappear. Brent, in the start of the program. Men taking time out within the household was raised in a number of interviews, often interviews of women who raised concerns about their partners refusing to follow the guidelines and thus reducing their confidence in what men were taking from the program. This was especially acute when men refused a request to leave and instead chose to take the time out somewhere in the house that the woman and all the children needed to be. In some instances, the outcome was a further incident of violence. So I went downstairs and I sat downstairs, and instead of going, right, here's the time out now, I started running over the injustices of it all, and how it's not fair. And I wound myself up, and I had to go back upstairs and have more words. And in that instance, yeah, I hit her. That's Peter again, isn't it? Peter's got problems. But Peter's... I want Peter to get counselling, you know. I want... I assume it's the same Peter. I instantly gave him the same voice. I did not deliberately choose which voices to do. I just kind of went with whatever sounded right for what was written down. So it wasn't deliberate. And some of these people may change their voices from one to another. Yes, so Peter went upstairs. First he went downstairs, and then, oh God, it's unfair. It's just It's not. Again, it's not a suggestion of power, is it? It's just a suggestion of powerlessness. Yeah, was not unfair. Sounds if he's got this feeling that things aren't fair, that he is some sort of unfair drink. He needs to get that off his chest. He finds he needs to find a healthy way of getting that off his chest. Sounds to me like Peter's doing some double bind of some sort. It's amazing. He's just reacting to a double bind or double binds that are triggering him. Anyway, I do think that Peter probably needs to get counselling, because see, this is the thing. It's all about taking the power away. I think Peter's got no power. I don't think Peter can express his feelings about what's not fair. Find something unfair. What was that other thing that he was saying? Hold on a minute. Remember, Peter was also the one who was saying that he was unfairly treated. I think Peter lacks assertiveness. I think that's part of Peter's problem. Peter's not an assertive person. I slipped up, I've attacked my partner, I've done everything I should have done. I've done everything I've been told to do. Have I used everything I've been given by my course? And the answer is no, I've not. Peter beats himself up. Peter beats himself up a lot, and he's very concerned that he hasn't done enough. He feels very responsible for a lot of things. I shoved her out the door, I tore the phone out of the socket and pushed it towards the park. So I mean, I don't know why she doesn't remember it. I'm surprised she doesn't remember it. It's almost like I think that Peter's violence is more traumatic for him than it is for her. It was terrible. It was terrible. Peter seems to suffer a lot of guilt. I think his guilt and his violence is connected, not in the obvious way you think. Where you think he's violent, he's going to be guilty. But I think the other way around as well. I think the guilt makes him violent just as much as the violence makes him feel guilty. I think that is his vicious cycle. He's never done enough. He's never good enough. Some appear to be using timeouts without fully understanding how or their purpose. But more often, what we see is evasion of taking responsibility for violence and self-interested manipulation, which allowed the conditions for further violence to occur. And she didn't know it. It came out of the blue. I put my hands around her throat, and she still thought I was playing a game. I don't remember doing that. I just leant over her like that, and I started like doing that, and then squeezing, and then after so many seconds, she can't remember, I can't remember. I pulled away, and I looked at her. I think she mentioned she was like, and that's when I stopped. So Owen near the start of the program. Owen is the one who said, if you get abusive, I'm going to have a timeout. He chokes her. But when he goes to choke her, she thinks he's playing a game. So he hasn't ever done that before. Because if he'd done anything like that before, that wouldn't be crossing her mind. He's just playing a game. She'd be going, oh my god, he's going to choke me again. You wouldn't even play that game, would you? If you'd ever choked somebody, you wouldn't do it as a joke. Do you know what I mean? If you'd ever done it for real, you'd probably think twice about doing it as a joke. He's doing it as a joke. And he doesn't do it as a joke. He does it real. And he doesn't realise that he's doing it until she's going, when he realises he's doing it. He was the one that's saying before, if you get abusive, I'm going to have to leave. Some of these things where you go, this guy's a mental case, but so's she. He's a mental case because she's mistreated him, and vice versa. Owen's the one that says he's going to have to leave if she's abusive. And then when he tries to choke her, she thinks it's a game. Because he's never done anything like that before, presumably. Do you know what Vera said?
And so we sat back and we thought about the two pieces of work we'd done, and we concluded that when we considered victims of crime who largely had suffered from domestic or sexual abuse, and when we considered defendants in crime who largely had been thrown into chaos by their experiences of sexual and domestic abuse, that actually we were talking about the same people.
Actually, we're talking about the same people. But you just need to send that sympathy for women. Or do you perhaps see that might be true of men as well? That perhaps the men that you're establishing as abusers might actually also be abused. But in fact, that can in itself be a vicious cycle. Because obviously, someone like Owen clearly is dangerously violent. He caught himself on the verge of choking his wife. Although he did successfully catch himself. When he realised what he was doing, he went, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" Because as soon as he heard him making those choking noises, he stopped. And neither of them can remember it, so there was some sort of loss of control there. We also know that he has to say to her, "If you get abusive, you're going to have to leave." So we know she gets abusive towards him as well. We think of the victims of crime who have been victims of domestic abuse. We think of as criminals that have got there because of their experiences of domestic abuse. We realize we're dealing with the same people. One respondent recounted instances of aggressive behaviour with a timeout had failed to work. On each occasion, he claimed to have raised the possibility of initiating a timeout, but on some occasions his wife had prevented him from doing this. He identified the difficulties between an in theory, on paper timeout and the in practice examples he provided. He did fail, though, to leave the house while trying to take his time out, choosing instead a utility room. He then blamed his partner for continuing the argument with no acknowledgement of his choosing not to follow the timeout rules. It was her failure that resulted in pushing back. Choosing is always heavily emphasized when talking about the perpetrator. You know why that is, don't you? Yes, it's our old friend, the melodrama diagram. I have had another character in there, she knows about fallen women. Fallen women do show some vice, but only because they have been corrupted by a villain who is a hyper agent. A fallen woman still is a hypo agent because her vice is not really her own. Its vice is inherited from somebody else. But the point is, of course, that the hero and villain are both hyper agents because they have choice. Everything that they do and their actions are choices of theirs. And the thing about the hypo agent is the hypo agent can receive sympathy, whereas the hyper agent can only receive judgment. The meso agent, which is how I prefer for us all to be seen, can receive empathy. Whereas a hyper agent has power and a hypo agent is helpless, a meso agent has influence, but at the same time he's also subject to influences outside of his control. If you remember Sebastian, who near the end of his course was assuring them that not only did he now know that his behaviour is unacceptable, now he knows it's totally and utterly unacceptable, so he's obviously trying to please them, that the course was valuable to him. He says repeatedly, it was always a choice, my choice to be like that. That's what he's learned on the course. That's obviously something that's very heavily emphasised on the course, is everything that you do and all the consequences of what you do is your choice. If you're trying to force yourself to my utility space, and I don't want you in there because I don't want to get violent, and that's what I'm pushing you away. For example, I'm not hitting you, I'm not trying to pick a fight with you, I'm just pushing you away, Majid, towards the end of the programme. You might expect me to comment on Majid, and I would, except actually there's a fuller version of that account later in the paper, so I'll refer to it then instead. But they're saying, oh, he blamed her when it was clearly him. It's clearly his mistake for not leaving the house. He's been told he's supposed to leave the house. That doesn't change the fact that she's pursuing him. Again, very weird for the supposed victim to pursuing the supposed abuser, isn't it? Then again, of course, being the victim, she's not choosing to pursue him to the utility room. He is choosing not to leave the house. Quite key. There's a reason why they're putting the emphasis on that. He's choosing not to leave the house, but there's no emphasis on her choosing to pursue him to the utility room. She can't help pursue him to the utility room. She's a victim. One woman at first interview, when her partner was just beginning the program, identified that a lot of his behaviour had centred on withholding, withdrawing, and going off. In the second interview, approximately 6 months later, the timeout has been incorporated into these same patterns of behaviour. Actually, that still continues. He was also encouraged to do that, he says on the program, timeout. I also see it that you can use it as a way of controlling. So you can look at that in two ways. That's sort of like double-pronged, really. And he will say, this is what I've been taught. And I'm thinking, no, this is about you wanting to have the control. Nadia, towards the end of the program. So Nadia is an interesting case in point, isn't she? She sees withdrawing as abuse in itself. Now, of course, the timeout is actually recommending withdrawing as a way of avoiding a violent situation. Which sounds like that's what he was doing before anyway. Even before he had the training, he was doing that. And she didn't like it. She didn't like him withdrawing. And now he's saying, well, that's what they've told me to do. They told me to do that on the program. Because you want to have the control. Well, he does want self-control. That's what the timeout was supposed to be about, was for him to gain self-control, and it's probably why he was withdrawing in the first place. But you decided to see that withdrawing as being abusive, Nadia. Why do you see that as abusive? It sounds not like... When he says he wants to have the control, kind of implies that she feels she should have the control. Yes, and Nadia seems to be quite controlling herself. She doesn't feel happy about him being able to withdraw if he wants to. Withdrawing is not a violent action, it is a violence avoiding, which is why it was recommended by the program. You don't need her support to use it. Okay, I want you to remember that, because that might come up later. Her unwillingness to let him withdraw seems to be the more controlling behaviour to me. She's worried about the fact that she's not been allowed to have control. The control, she says, not some control. There's no control sharing. She won't permit control sharing. There is only one control. And if somebody has to have it, it's her. That's how that comes across to me. In another case, a man claimed he had to learn more about the technique before putting it into practice. While demonstrating his account, he actually had a good understanding of the technique, and that was not the reason for not using it. In the end of the program, some men acknowledged that they had not, but should have been using the technique. These examples suggest that DVPPs might discover resistance among men to change from exploring wherever and how they're using the timeouts. Making partner responsible. Some men admitted to asking their partners to take timeouts, thus making them responsible for preventing or avoiding their abusive behaviour. The justification spoke to a deep sense of entitlement. They were not in the right frame of mind to take timeouts, or they needed some space and time. One man took a timeout in another room and then accused his partner of not taking it seriously when she needed to get something from this room. He's taking a timeout in the other room, she's not taking it seriously. You're not taking it seriously. I'm trying to avoid you. Because I'm trying to avoid being violent. I don't give a shit about you being violent towards me. I don't give a shit. Be violent towards me, go on, do it. I don't care. I'm trying not to be. Come to no room. Take it seriously, for God's sake. Interviewed women, however, offered examples of men failing to identify when they needed to take the time out, meaning they had to introduce this. But we haven't used that a great deal, and it's actually supposed to be something that my partner is supposed to recognise, and he never does. It's always me that has to say, look, you should be doing the timeout. And as he's trying to leave, he's still saying stuff, still going on, and I'm having to say, you're still doing it, go away! France's partner near the start of the programme. Now, of course, I've got no idea of how these things are actually said. I'm just reading them off the page and how they come across to me. That sounded quite nagging, didn't it? That sounded quite trolling. Just go! Just go! Stop saying stuff! Go away! Told you. Stop saying things! Go away! Is she any different from the guy? Is she any different from Nadia's husband, who wants to withdraw, except she's making sure that he does the withdrawing instead of her? I think this is one of the dangers of the programme. I'm reading about this and I'm going, you know, accusing your partner of abusing you is actually, could easily be a controlling behaviour in itself. Yeah, I think accusing somebody of abuse is feasibly a controlling behaviour. I wonder if that's the case with her. Go away, you've been told. You've been told. You gotta go. When you get like this, you gotta go. You've been told that. Go. Go. She doesn't actually sound to me like she's submissive to sit under his thumb. It sounds quite like she's got quite a bit of power in the relationship. In another example, a woman identified the pressure a partner would put on her rather than himself initiating the effective use of the timeout technique. Even this timeout doesn't do it properly. It kind of forces me to leave because I want to get away from him. When I know he's in that mood and I'm angry, I need to get away because otherwise I end up in the same state that he's at. And what's that going to result in? Two really angry people in the house that can't back down to each other. It's just pointless. So I end up just getting my car and going. And I always have to take my son with me because he wants to take his dad. He just senses he's like, I want to come, mummy. So he'll come with me if he knows if I'm upset. But I think, why should I always be the one that's doing this? He should just take it upon himself and think, you know, I need to go for a walk or something, anything. He doesn't. He'll go and sit in the shed and see that as a timeout. But to me, it's not, because he's still on the premises. Jessica, partner, in the start of the program. The gap between the program having an impact on the men who attended and making use of the techniques they are taught is illustrated in the quote below, where the responsibility of avoiding violence and abuse clearly remained with the woman. I mean, he comes home nearly every week in tears because of how hard-hitting some of the weeks have been. And it lasts a couple of days, and he'll say something, and I'll say, name, they taught you this on the program the other week, you know, about taking time out and stuff, and you've never taken one yet. It's me that ends up going into the bedroom. Naturally, partner near the start of the program. Well, you know, going to the bedroom isn't a proper time out because you haven't left the premises. Were you wanting him to be sent to his room? The idea was you just get away from the situation. That was the idea of the timeout. So you weren't taking time out either. Neither of you were taking time out. It's me that has to go to the bedroom. The idea was that one of you left the premises and got well out of the way. Making allegations about some of the other men that they hadn't done the timeout properly because they hadn't left the premises. And she's saying, oh, it's me that has to do the timeout. And yet her doing the timeout is also equally not doing it properly as the guy who locks himself in the utility room. Oh, Jessica's husband in the shed. Well, that's not proper timeout, is it? I mean, he's still on the premises. That's not how it's supposed to be done. I've read the manual. I know what's supposed to be done. I can't do anything right. Yeah, do you think maybe you're abusive towards him a little bit? Another manipulative adaptation was sharing timeouts, which suggests that women were at least partly responsible for change. It could be the case that the woman is equally responsible for change. Assuming it isn't. I don't know how much assessment was done to establish whether they'd actually found the perpetrator or if they just assumed the perpetrator was the male. And because there's no one in this study that is a female perpetrator, and there's no one in this study that's a male victim, that could just be sampling bias, or it could be the fact that they have just in this program assumed the perpetrator is always the male. And the other day in the car, we were about to explode, and he just turns around to me, and I was like really getting angry. He said, time out, he said, you're breaking the rules. Maureen, partner in the start of the program. Now hold on, she's definitely admitting that it was her that was losing her temper there, right? I was getting really angry. I was getting really angry, and we were about to explode. We were about to explode. So it's clearly, when she says we were about to explode, it's clearly a reciprocal. Whatever the abuse is, whether the abuse is just shouting match or whether there's actual violence involved, I don't know. I don't know what the nature of the violence in their relationship is, whether it is physical violence or not, because as they said right at the beginning, there's a mix of both in here. But she said that she was getting really angry, and he said, time out, you're breaking the rules. Yeah, so if she's the one getting really angry, maybe she is partly responsible for change, right? Maybe she is the one that has problems controlling her temper. And that doesn't seem to be considered at all by either the people who are running the program or the people that are doing this study. In fact, if anything, just listen to her language. I was getting really angry, but we were about to explode. If anyone is actually taking their behaviour and making it something the other person's responsible for, if you look at the content of what she's saying there, that would seem to be her. She seems to be saying it was us about to explode, even though she admits I was the one who was getting really angry. So it seems that what the text, narrator, if you like, is telling us is that he is the one that is trying to share responsibility for something that's really his fault. But if you actually listen to the quote that she's giving, the quote seems to suggest that she's the one that is trying to share out responsibility for something that's her responsibility. That's what that sounds like to me. Having not negotiated how the timeout should be used and or misusing the timeout, have precluded respectful communication or expanded space for action. Women were often held partially or wholly responsible for the failure of the technique. In the example below, the man is holding his wife accountable for not allowing him to take a timeout, while failing to understand the importance of him leaving the house in this instance. In theory, the program has spoken to my wife and spoken to me and both of us that we should both need to agree something called timeout. It's not a criticism for one of you or both of you. You need to allow the person to walk away and then come back, and that's how it's done. In practice, if one of you is carrying on ranting or chasing after the other person to talk or have a go at them, then it's not working, is it? So if I go and hide in the utility and shut the door, and the door was being pushed onto me and she's forcing to get in, or I go and lock myself in the toilet, for example, and the door was being banged, then you're not being allowed to take the benefits of that time out, are you? It takes two to agree it. It's all well and good on paper or in text or in writing on A4 piece of paper saying this is how it should work and this is what you should do. If you're not doing that, if one of you is not doing that, there's no solution to it. Do you know what I mean? Akil, near the end of the program. I thought that was Majid, actually, because it was the same, almost the same situation was being described. So when I said earlier, oh, don't worry, there's a fuller account of this later, that was the one I was thinking of, but actually it's not, it's a different person. Akil is different from Majid. There I go again, getting two people of ethnic, other races mixed together. I'm such a racist. They both sound alike to me. Clearly they don't. They clearly have two different names. I just made a mistake. So if you haven't watched the previous video, you won't know what that joke's referring to. The previous video, I foolishly got Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela confused, which was ironic because the same video referred to the fact that these people of the same race is sometimes considered to be a sign of racism, but it isn't. It's a sign of something that's quite common and innate that just happens to be part of the etiology, or can be part of the etiology of racism. Anyway, that's just a recap. But it's a very similar story, isn't it? It's a very similar story to the one Majid had. He tries to lock himself in the utility room, and she's forcing herself into the utility room. Or sometimes he tries to lock himself in the toilet, and she's banging on the door. Okay, I get it. He's not doing the timeout properly. The timeout was supposed to be him leaving the premises. But it also doesn't suggest he's the abuser, does it? She's banging on the door. She's not letting him withdraw. That doesn't suggest that he's the one that is trying to bring a attention to its head in a way that could erupt in violence. It doesn't make sense that the abuser is the one that does the fleeing, does it? Now, it may well be the person that has difficulty controlling themselves may do the fleeing because they want to flee from a situation in which they might lose control. But she's obviously lost control as well. She's banging on the door. She's trying to force her way into the utility room. Wherever he's hidden, she won't let him hide. And he's the one being sent on the program. Because he's the one who needs to alter his behaviour. But her behaviour includes pursuing him to wherever he flees to, whether it's the utility room or the toilet, and banging on the door repeatedly. I don't know why this isn't being questioned. Why is my question's not being asked by this? Why are the researchers not saying, hold on, are we sure we got the right one here? Did we really get the perpetrator here? Is it the perpetrator who picked this training, or was it the victim who picked this training? Conclusion. The actual use and misuse of timeouts has been an under-researched area. These findings of men in DVPPs and women partners and ex-partners contribute to the knowledge base of implications for policy and practice. The findings support and extend the findings by Debbonairre et al., documenting both positive and negative experiences of timeout and deepening this understanding by proposing a model for systematically pursuing experiences of timeout and related program interventions. Jennings also raised concerns in relation to the communication of timeout. In the Mirabel study, examples were provided of inaccuracies in how men described to their partners how a timeout was to be used. Communication between women and the programs was also sometimes lacking. The deepest changes were evident where timeout was used as a principle-based rather than rule-based technique. It is here the interruption of violence combined with additional indicators of success. We are arguing that the intentions within timeout of using the space to think about, reflect on, and understand one's actions are more important than following a set of rules. We encourage DVPPs to review the ways timeout is written in manuals and taught in programs and in the materials provided to men and women. The emphasis should focus on interruption as providing an opportunity for reflection and analysis with respect to men and voice and agency for women. Reflection and analysis for men and voice and agency for women, because the men don't need agency or voice. Well, poor Peter. Peter's saying, well, I've been unfairly treated. It's unjust. Unfairly treated. But we're not going to have any voice or agency, even though it's possibly lack of voice and agency that is causing him to lash out. We know he lashes out. We know that Peter has violent turns, but we also know that he suffers a lot of guilt, and he feels that he has been unfairly treated, which he cannot give voice to, and he can't express. And he winds up expressing it in violence, which is the frightening and sad fact, is that the way he is expressing his frustrations is in violence. And that's a problem that he should be seeking a solution for. But it seems to me that what he needs is voice and agency, not reflection. He already blames himself for everything. He's always going, did I do enough? Did I do enough? I don't think I did enough. Oh, we're terrible. He's already doing reflection. Reflection's not helping. What he needs is voice and agency, and he hasn't got that. And that's just making him more frustrated. Beating himself up more. He beats himself up first. Yeah, that's not equal, is it? We're going to give voice and agency to women because we assume that women don't have voice and agency, and we're going to give reflection to men because we assume that men don't reflect. I think Peter already reflects. I think Peter already blames himself for everything. I think that's probably why Peter's such a basket case. I don't think Peter's unusual in that. It's just that I've picked out a lot of the things that Peter says suggests that he has some problems expressing his frustrations. In addition, exploring of both men and women in depth how time out is being used, is it moving to a more relational engagement or being misappropriated, could be done in both group work of men and support work of women. Further research is needed to explore the resistance of some men to using timeouts and whether this represents limited interest and change overall. In making recommendations, we stress that the accounts of the use of the timeout technique within the Mirabelle interviews occurred within semi-structured interviews that were concerned with the effectiveness of the DVPP in creating change and not directly the timeout technique. I'm going to suggest things here because I'm not going to say that in all DV situations is always the one to use. I don't want to do that. It's ridiculous. The statistic that 1 in 3 victims of domestic abuse are men actually sounds kind of realistic to me. That sounds so realistic because I wouldn't expect. If women want to control men, I don't think the most likely way of them doing it is violence. But because they're talking about timeout, as it said right at the beginning, this showed a willingness to be on the program, and I'm thinking this might actually be as part of the selection problem here, because there seems to be a lot of these guys to be actually the ones that have very little in the way of control in the relationship, and it does seem that the partners are more controlling. But one of the things that may be self-selecting here is these are men that have taken on what the program's telling them. The ones that have been told, you're the perpetrator and you're going to have to do something about this, aren't you? You're going to have to say something like, yeah, I am. They might actually be the ones that have most of a sort of manipulable personality, most easily victimized, because the most vulnerable are going to be the ones that are going to be most accepting when they're told that. The ones that are belligerently going, I don't think so, are actually the ones that are most likely to be actual genuine abusers. Whereas the ones that go, yeah, I know, I mean, Peter, people say, Peter is clearly a guilt-ridden man, isn't he? And I think that's why Peter loses control, is because every criticism is an attack, hurts him really deeply. Every criticism hurts him really deeply because he's got a real fragile sense of self-worth. Did I do enough? I don't think I did do enough. I didn't do enough. I'm not thinking about how unfair it was. But he is violent. Peter gets violent. But there's also something put upon about Peter as well. Yes, so it might be that the ones most likely to volunteer the program are the ones that are most susceptible to guilt, and therefore being the ones most susceptible to guilt, they're also the ones that are most susceptible to being victims of abuse themselves. So I think there might be a case of selection bias here, because I'm sure that not everyone that was put on the program were victims. I think probably people put on the program probably included a lot of people that were perpetrators, but I think the ones that actually responded, yeah, I'll do that, I'll do whatever, I have to do, whatever I have to do, I don't like me like this, I'll be the ones that are most vulnerable. The timeout came out as such a strong issue within the research is an important finding in itself. This raises a limitation in the findings, albeit one that could be easily addressed in future research, that of centering the timeout technique as the focus of the inquiry. We recommend that future research into timeout and other techniques provided by the program draw on the framework we have outlined to identify experiential and instrumental uses of timeout. Further research could also assess the extent to which it is used within criminal justice mandated DVPPs. We hope that in opening up a discussion about the technique within DVPPs, some of the attention that has previously been focused on do DVPPs work can be shifted to examining not only the efficacy questions, but also the questions of how, why, and for whom change happens. More specifically, we recommend exploring whether and how the tools violent men are offered work to increase not just women's and children's safety, but also their freedom to become an equal partner in the everyday negotiations that comprise relationships. So you see there, domestic violence is, at the end there, being in the context of equality, that it comes about as a result of inequality with the person who's violent being the one that has most power, which actually I find to be a little absurd. I would actually think that the person who is most likely violent is the one that has a feeling of loss of power in some way. Because, in fact, it's not like the higher up society you go, the more violent people are. It's quite the contrary, isn't it? It's the people that the very lower classes that are most likely to resort to violence. It's the ones that don't have much in the way of power. In fact, there's a little fact that I remember back from my sort of like manginery days that was even presented to me by a feminist as being sort of like a feminist point of view, which was, it's always in relationships where the woman is more intelligent than the man that he turns out to be violent. And I go, well, yeah, you can see that because, of course, he keeps losing the argument. Right? She keeps winning the argument, and he doesn't. He's forced into a last resort situation. Now, of course, the reason why it was being put to me by a feminist at that time, and the reason why I accepted it in my mangina state was it kind of portrayed women as superior. Yeah, women are really clever, men are really dumb. That's why we're violent, because we're dumb. But it also makes you think, yeah, but intelligence gives you power, right? Being more intelligent than your partner means you have power over your partner. So it could well be that when people are violent is because they don't have enough power, not because they have too much power. And I think with Peter, Peter's lacking assertion, isn't he? He can't assert himself. And that's why he was violent, because he can't defend. I feel he can't defend himself. He feels defenseless. And it's because he feels defenseless he lashes out. I think I'm getting. Somehow I've just got him on a virtual couch. He's drawn out my armchair psychologist, and I just want to analyse him. Anyway. Right, so some of the things in that paper worried me, and they worried me because they made me think, some of these people that you've identified as perpetrators don't sound like perpetrators to me, they sound like they might be victims. Or they're in relationships with reciprocal violence or reciprocal abuse, because I think, abuse can be part of a cycle. It could be a cycle of abuse in a relationship. It may be hard to tell. It might not be that there's a perpetrator and a victim. It might be that one person's feeding into the other, and they're just bad news for each other. And yet, if he suggests that they share the responsibility, that is considered by the writers of their paper to be a manipulation, rather than in fact a way of looking at things. And the women that are taking time out themselves, it's portraying that as a bad thing. Whereas I say, actually, if time out works, it probably is because it's empowering. It's empowering to take yourself out of the situation, which is a violent situation. I can remove myself from that, and then I take on some self-sovereignty and control of myself, and I have time and space to think. That is empowering, and I think it's probably a good idea. A good idea for both abuser and perpetrator. Abuser and perpetrator is the same thing, isn't it? Both perpetrator and victim, if it is a perpetrator-victim relationship. Or either party, if it is a reciprocal violence relationship, to remove themselves from the situation. Surely removing yourself from the situation is the more empowering thing to do. So I don't see how there's a problem. If women want to remove themselves from the situation, then all straight to their elbow. They should do that. And yeah, I'm actually not. I'm not against the idea of timeout itself. I just found a lot of things in that article revealing that maybe the person they put on the program wasn't the abuser, or certainly wasn't the solely responsible for the violence that was occurring in their relationship. Right. Well, that article took up quite a bit of time, didn't it? It's over an hour and a half already, but I do want to finish with this, because from that article, I think we can derive that some of the people that on the DVPPs that are offered by Respect seem to actually quite possibly be victims. And I said, If you want to control somebody, accusing them of abuse is a great way of controlling them. So bear that in mind when I read this pamphlet by Respect, How to Tell if Your Abusive Partner is Changing. He takes responsibility for his behaviour. He acknowledges and accepts responsibility for what he's done fully, acknowledges that he used abuse to control you and that it was wrong. He doesn't blame you, other people, his stress, his job, or any other outside circumstances for his behaviour. He is no longer denies his behaviour, makes light of it, or makes excuses for it. There's going to be lots of typos in this that are bad grammar. He acknowledges that he chose to behave this way instead of saying that other people made him do it or that he can't control himself. He fully understands and acknowledges that what he did was wrong. He admits lies, he admits what he's done, he's no longer making up stories to make himself look better. He no longer tries to hide his behaviour from others. He understands that recovery from abusiveness takes a long time and you have to work at it for a long, long time. Two longs don't make a light, you know. And of course, making light is one of the things that he's not allowed to do. See, that was quite a nice sort of segue, wasn't it? From that joke. He's not allowed to make light of it. He's got, not only has he got to accept his guilt and admit that it was all him, and he takes full culpability for it. No outside forces were affected his behaviour in any way, and it was all controlled. So it was all planned. It was all pre-planned. Pre-planned. You were in complete control the whole time. There's no such thing as a loss of control. The original meaning of temper is a calm disposition. It is self-control. That's the whole idea. Is if you lose your temper, you've lost your calm disposition. You've lost your self-control. So people say, "Oh, he's got a temper." Well, I mean, he's actually, oh, he's got a bad temper, which means that he hasn't got very much temper. It's a very interesting way in which the language has kind of, I don't know, it's evolved. It's quite regressive, really, to me. That we had a word that was perfectly good and we understood what it meant, and we lost the meaning, lost sense of the meaning because we got sloppy about the way we use language. But yeah, it's interesting because the inference in the way they talk about anger is it's always been a choice rather than a loss of choice. They always talk about it as if your anger is something you control, rather than you have lost control. Even when they talk about losing your temper, you deliberately lose your temper. You can't deliberately lose your temper because your temper is your control. Linguistically, that's a contradiction. So he's got to accept full hyper agency about it. He's not allowed to he's not allowed to make light of it. He's got to understand the full weight. The full weight has to be on upon him. He has to be fully guilty and know he is beyond redemption before he has any chance of redemption. Ironically, he has to feel like and yeah, a long time. She's made an effort to say 2 longs. Very vengeful. I feel it was typed out. Bang, 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 2 fingers. Bang, 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 bang. I'm really angry at this. I hate men so much. He understands the effects of his behaviour. He understands what his behaviours cost you. He understands fully that you and your children have been hurt by what he has done and the ways in which you've been hurt. He will talk with you in depth, if you want to, about how you feel, your fear, your hurt, your anger, your rights, your lack of trust for him, and understands fully that it is his behaviour that's caused it. He is sorry for what he's done. And he's working hard to overcome the damage he's done and is actively making up for it by giving you back what is rightfully yours. Money, rights, freedoms, choices, etc. He understands that it will take his victims a long time to recover from what he's done to them. Remember how Peter said that it just kept going through his head how unfair everything was? Yeah, it sounds like the pressures that you could be put under, the expectations upon you, if you have been accused of being an abuser, it would seem unjust and unfair. He respects you. He's proving to you that he understands that you're a human being with rights and is no longer trying to take them away from you. No more double standards. He understands that you're an equal human being and he's not superior to you. He's pulling his weight. He respects your opinions, even the ones he disagrees with. He accepts your right to be angry with him for what he's done. He respects your right to independence and your right to freedom. He changes his behaviour. He is no longer violent in any way. He is making a big effort to be non-abusive. He does not pressure you, intimidate you, or threaten you. He is no longer blocking communication. He listens and respects what you have to say. He will discuss with you the controlling behaviours and attitudes he's had. You can speak and act freely without him retaliating. If he tries to control you, you can point it out to him and he'll stop. When you express anger at him, he listens instead of getting angry and trying to shout you down, threatening you, or trying to convince you that something's wrong with you for feeling that way. You can express anger, but he can't express anger. There's no double standards. There'd be no double standards, but I can express anger and you can't express anger. That's a double standard, isn't it? You're not saying no double standards, you're saying new double standards. Double standards that favour me. It's kind of reparations. Which is not seeking a situation of equilibrium that means that there's a stable situation. You're actually creating a new victim and a new abuser, if indeed you'd identified the abuser and victim the right way in the first place. If you have entered it the wrong way, you're actually aiding the abuser with this set of criteria, aren't you? He stops interfering in your friendships and family relationships, and you're able to re-establish and repair those and make new friends. He stops monitoring your movements, demanding to know where you are and who's there. He stops expecting sex on demand. He stopped drinking. He's fair of money, allowing you to have your assets in your name and job if you want. He takes responsibility for what he does and how it affects you and the children. He no longer treats you like a servant. How to tell he's not changing? He continues to be violent anyway. He threatens and tries to intimidate you. This would often include threats to attack families and friends, threats to kill you or put a contract on you, threats that you'll take the children away or get custody of them himself, or threats to kill himself. No, don't threaten to kill yourself, just do it. Just do it. I think that's what would be preferred. By the sounds of this, he badmouths you to the children stroke others. He says, I can't change unless you do. This means he's been trying to get you to agree to give up your rights and freedoms in exchange for him not abusing you. Do you remember the guy that locked himself in the toilet and she banged on the door? And they said, oh, he was wrong, he should have got off the premises. But he's locked himself in the toilet because he can't take it. And she's banging on the door and he's still the abuser. And he's not allowed to say, I can't change unless you change. So she is allowed to hound him. She's allowed to bang on the door. And he's not allowed to say, your behaviour affects my behaviour in some way. He tries to get sympathy from you, family members and friends. I don't even know the guy, he's already got my sympathy. Bastard! He's elicited my sympathy just by existing. I just have to imagine the person that is on the receiving end of this, and he has my sympathy. Swine. He's still lying to you, the children, your family, or other people about what he's done. He won't acknowledge that it was wrong. He doesn't seem sorry that he did it. He only seems sorry he's suffered some consequences for it. He refuses to let the subject of his abuse come up, or gets angry when it does. He won't discuss his controlling behaviours and attitudes. He still tries to deny it, minimise it, excuse it, or justify it. He plays victim. He plays victim. Remember, respect. Also provide a helpline for men who are victims of domestic violence. But playing victim could be a sign that you're an abuser. Which is what I said. I said, yeah, accusing somebody of abusing you could be a controlling behaviour in itself. So I suppose it's possible that an abuser could be playing victim. It's also true that a victim could be playing victim. He says, how could you do this to me? He still whines and blames you for all the problems. He still whines. He sulks as well. Sulking and whining, having emotions. He's not allowed to feel anger. Feminists want you to express your emotions, remember? Feminists are very keen that men should be able to express their emotions, but you mustn't whine, or sulk, or be angry. He is overly charming, always trying to remind you of all the good times you had together and ignore the bad. or be happy. Don't whine, sulk, be angry, or be happy, or make light. He tries to buy you back romantic gifts, dinners, flowers, all while trying to convince you that you need to stay together to work it out. Well, if you're not going to stay together, there's no point trying to change, is there? I mean, yeah, my advice to him would be give up. This is going to be a miserable life. Don't try and stay with her. As soon as she accused you of abuse, and then she started using respect to make you do that program, all chances of you having a happy life with this person have gone. So no, don't try and convince her that you're both staying together, because you're not. Because staying together is going to give you a nervous breakdown. You need to get the hell out of there. He will not get help, or says he'll get counselling or other help, but he never does. He does not get help, and then he tries to convince you that he's cured and you need to take him back now. Sorry, I misread that. It actually said he does get help. He does get help, and then tries to convince you that he's cured and you need to take him back now. So in fact, the very fact that he tries to convince you that he's changed means he hasn't changed. No, I think as soon as somebody's accused you of abuse, that's it. Relationship over. There's no point. He might suddenly claim to have found God. He goes to church a few times. Damn those false idols, eh? Finding God. You know there's only one true religion. That's the religion of feminism. He cries and begs, particularly in the public situations that you embarrass and appear to be cold-hearted. Okay, what emotions is he not allowed to express now? He's not allowed to be happy. He's not allowed to be angry. He's not allowed to sulk. He's not allowed to make light. He's not allowed to be charming. And now he's not allowed to cry. Okay. He does things to try to sabotage your efforts to make it on your own. He harasses or stalks you. If you ask him for space or time, he refuses to allow you to have any and continues to make contact in any way he can. Do you remember one of the signs of positive change was he is no longer blocking communications? He's not trying to communicate, and he's no longer blocking communication. Communication must be entirely on your terms. Otherwise, he's still an abuser. Harassment by phone calls, threats, legal frustration, showing up at work, hanging around family. He continues to restrict your rights. He still behaves as if he's superior. You aren't able to express yourself and speak freely. You're not allowed to express yourself? Fucking hell! How many emotions did we cover that he's not allowed to express? He's not allowed to be angry. He's not allowed to feel hard done by. He's not allowed to cry. He's not allowed to make light. He's not allowed to be charming. He's not allowed to express himself in any way. And then you say he doesn't let you express yourself, and there must be no double standards. He still demands constant attention, won't allow you to take care of your own needs. He still picks at you and criticises you. I can't believe that they're unaware of the irony here. In the middle of all that, he criticises you and ignores your strength and contributions to the relationship. He doesn't support you in independence, still refuses to acknowledge that you have rights. He puts his wants and needs above yours. He doesn't recognise the damage he's done. He gets angry with you over the consequences you've suffered over his abuse. He's mad or seems confused as to why you fear him, don't trust him, are hurt and angry. He tries to get out of consequences by trying to convince you there's something wrong with you. He's mad that you left instead of recognising your right to have done so. He still acts like you owe him. He's impatient or critical of you for not forgiving him immediately, for not being satisfied with the changes he may have already made, especially if he hasn't made the changes you requested, or hasn't changed but claims he has. He's only concerned with how hard the situation is for him and no one else. He feels sorry for himself. Somebody's got to feel sorry for him, quite frankly. He doesn't show appropriate concern for you, how you and the children feel about what he's done. Abuse does more than just hurt. It is damaging. And if he doesn't show appropriate concern for the damage he's done, then he hasn't changed. He says he can only change if you help him. He wants emotional support and forgiveness. He says, I'm changing, but you can see that he's not. He gets angry with you for not realising how much he's changed. He gets angry for not trusting that he's changed for good. Abusive men often say, I'm sorry, then get mad if you don't immediately forget what they did. He thinks his sorry resolves the matter and it should be dropped and you should just move forward. Remember, your partner is not the enemy. Your partner is not the enemy. Not the enemy. He pressures you into taking him back. For more information, call the respect phone line. He's supposed to do the checklist to see if he's changed. Well, no one can match those criteria without going mad. Ensuring that the relationship's at an end, or ensuring that he's driven to suicide, or ensuring that he needs serious psychological help as a result of that. I mean, that's an abuser's charter there. Everything in there is an abuser's charter. And I said at the beginning, bear in mind, they might have got it wrong. They might have got, reading some of those accounts, it did sound like they hadn't got the abuser, they got the victim. And they were putting the victim through this training. When you read that, I'm actually now got to the end. I don't care. I don't care if he is the abuser. That's still abuse. That checklist of expectations upon him is abusive. It's vengeful. And it's going to cause somebody damage. If it doesn't cause him to be violent, I'd be very surprised. I'd be very surprised that somebody, under the pressures that checklist would put upon them, if they don't have some sort of violent reaction, maybe not against you, maybe he's really self-controlled, he'll just punch a wall or kill himself. But he will be violent in some way. I don't have a cheery sign-off. It's one of those subjects, isn't it, when you're talking about abuse, how you deal with abuse. At the beginning of the sort of investigation, you go, again, winning that sort of the same sort of feeling of skepticism that I always have. Is anyone like that? According to nature, I've got to the end of that. I don't really have much in the way of doubt at all right now. Imagining that happened to somebody, I suppose through that sort of thing, at least there's a few characters there that you began to really feel for. Oh, it was Peter. It was terrible. Did I do enough? I don't know if I did enough. But you knew were really suffering, and then you can imagine them having to adhere to that checklist. And probably having to adhere to that checklist is the double binds I spoke about that he felt were really unfair, and he just couldn't get out of his head how unfair it was. And in that instance, I hit her, he said. In that instance, that implies that he hasn't hit it before. I wonder if this program ever actually causes domestic violence. If somebody goes in there going, he's got controlling behaviours, and we'll send him on this course to get him out of controlling behaviours, and then he winds up going so fucking mad. He winds up actually being violent as a result of the course that's supposed to prevent him from being violent. I wonder if that happens. Because I can imagine that happening. That would just drive you mad, wouldn't it? Right. Let's play out some chansons, shall we?
So we sat back and we thought about the two pieces of work we'd done, and we concluded that when we considered victims of crime who largely had suffered from domestic or sexual abuse, and when we considered defendants in crime who largely had been thrown into chaos by their experiences of sexual and domestic abuse, that actually we're talking about the same people.